Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're looking at, these tiny algae phytoplankton, the ones that kind of float around in lakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
You might think of them as harmless, maybe even like, helpful when it comes to climate change.
Right.
But there's this recent article in Nature Communications. It's called Global Late Phytoplankton Proliferation Intensifies Climate Warming. And, well, it paints like a way more complicated picture.
Yeah, that's right. This study really challenges some common assumptions about phytoplankton. At first glance, they seem like they'd be good for the climate. They absorb CO2 during photosynthesis, just like trees.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought too. Like, they're plants, they take in CO2, but is that not the whole story?
Well, there's a twist.
Yeah.
So while they do take up carbon dioxide, a lot of it actually ends up back in the atmosphere. And when phytoplankton die and decompose, that carbon gets released
Oh.
as CO2 and even more concerningly as methane.
Ah, methane. Right, right. That's that, super potent greenhouse gas. Way worse than CO2.
Exactly. Yeah. When we talk about greenhouse gases, we often use this term CO2 equivalence. Think of it like, I guess, like a universal translator for warming.
Okay.
That lets us compare the warming impact of all these different gases.
Yeah.
And over a 100-year period, methane has like a warming effect that's over 27 times greater than CO2.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even though phytoplankton might seem like they're helping at first by like taking up CO2, they could actually be making the warming worse.
Yeah, that's the surprising finding of this research. It turns out that late phytoplankton, they actually release more warming power than they absorb. So they're like net contributors to climate change.
Huh. That's pretty concerning.
Yeah.
So I guess like what does this mean for our lives? Is there anything we can even do about it?
Well, one key factor is this thing called eutrophication. It's basically where excess nutrients like fertilizers and pollutants, they find their way into lakes.
So like it's almost like giving phytoplankton extra food to grow, leading to even more of them.
Exactly. And remember, the more phytoplankton there are, the greater that negative climate impact. It's a vicious cycle, right?
Yeah.
Warmer temperatures can lead to more phytoplankton, which release more of those warming gases, making the problem even worse. Scientists, they call this a feedback loop.
Okay, yeah, this is starting to sound kind of like alarming. Is this happening like everywhere in all lakes?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, I guess. The study found that the impact of phytoplankton varies a lot depending on location. Like, for example, North America, it has the highest regional CO2 equivalent feedback from phytoplankton, likely because we've got a lot of large lakes here and unfortunately a lot of eutrophication.
Okay, so the impact isn't like equal across the globe.
Right, yeah. And in some cases, warming might actually lead to less phytoplankton, which, that could potentially reduce their impact on climate change.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the need for location-specific solutions.
Yeah,
We can't just assume that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work everywhere.
yeah, that makes sense. So, like, how do we even begin to address this? It sounds like phytoplankton are playing a pretty complex role in the climate system.
It certainly is complex, but understanding the role of eutrophication, that's key. If we can reduce that nutrient pollution in lakes, we can potentially lessen that negative climate impact.
So controlling eutrophication is important, but how do we actually do that? Like, is it as simple as telling farmers to use less fertilizer?
Well, it's definitely not that simple.
Okay.
But, sustainable agricultural practices, those are a big part of the solution.
Hmm.
Like, imagine if everyone listening took steps to reduce fertilizer use, maybe planted buffer zones around waterways, to prevent runoff, or even, like, supported policies that encourage restoring wetlands.
Right.
These actions, they can have a real impact.
So it sounds like, individual choices, combined with some larger scale changes, that could make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that even seemingly small actions can have a ripple effect. And remember, we're all connected to these ecosystems, whether we live right next to a lake or, miles away. What happens in one part of the world, it ultimately affects us all.
That's a powerful thought. This is definitely a lot to absorb, but it's incredibly important information.
It is. And the good news is that by understanding these complexities, we can start to find solutions that work.
So we're learning that the impact of phytoplankton on the climate really depends on, where you are in the world, what makes some lakes like more susceptible to this problem than others?
Well, as we've touched on, nutrient pollution from human activities,
Hmm.
that plays a huge role.
Right.
Think about a lake that's like near a farm, where fertilizer runoff is common, or one downstream from a city that's, dealing with wastewater issues.
Okay.
Those excess nutrients, they act like a feast for phytoplankton, leading to those like big blooms.
Yeah.
And those ultimately release more of those greenhouse gases.
So it's almost like we're accidentally supercharging these tiny algae, and then they just turn around and make climate change worse.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just, farms and cities. Even things like lawn fertilizers in suburban areas, those can contribute to nutrient overload in nearby, lakes and rivers.
Wow. So even something as like seemingly harmless as keeping our lawns green can have an impact on the climate.
Yeah.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
It does, and it reminds us that we all have a role to play in, finding solutions. Like, imagine the impact if everyone listening took steps to, like, reduce their use of fertilizers, whether it's, on farms or in their own backyards.
Yeah. That's a powerful thought. It makes you realize that even small changes can like add up to make a big difference. But shifting gears a bit, I'm curious about the other side of the coin. You mentioned earlier that some lakes might actually see a decrease in phytoplankton because of climate change.
Right.
Why would that happen?
Well, it comes down to the specific conditions of each lake.
Okay.
Some might experience changes in water temperature or nutrient availability that actually make it harder for phytoplankton to thrive. Picture like a lake that's already struggling with low nutrient levels. Further warming could actually make things even tougher for the algae there.
So it's not a simple equation of, warmer temperatures always equal more phytoplankton.
Exactly. It's about understanding the unique characteristics of each lake and how they might respond to a changing climate.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So while this research highlights a potential problem, it also, kind of underscores the need for more research, right? We need to figure out which lakes are most at risk, so we can prioritize our efforts.
Absolutely. We need more detailed studies to understand the complex interplay of factors at play, in different regions and lake types.
Right. And that brings us back to, what we can do to address this issue. We've talked about reducing nutrient pollution, but what are some other potential solutions?
Well, one promising avenue is restoring wetlands.
Okay.
These areas, they act as natural filters, removing excess nutrients from water before it reaches, lakes and rivers.
Yep.
Imagine a wetland as like a giant sponge soaking up those pollutants and preventing them from, feeding those phytoplankton blooms.
That's a great analogy. It makes wetlands sound like climate superheroes.
They really are. And restoring degraded wetlands can have like a cascade of positive effects, not just for climate change, but for, biodiversity and water quality as well. It's a win-win-win situation.
Yeah. This all makes me wonder, are there any like technologies being developed to help us tackle this problem?
There are actually some fascinating innovations emerging. For instance, some researchers are exploring the use of bioreactors.
What's that?
So essentially, they're tanks filled with bacteria that can remove nutrients from water. Think of it like a mini wastewater treatment plant, but, for a lake.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. It sounds like, science fiction, but it could have real world applications.
It's definitely an area to watch. And it highlights how technological advancements, combined with a deeper understanding of ecological processes, those can offer us new tools to address these complex environmental challenges.
Yeah, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. Who knew something as like tiny as phytoplankton could be so complex and have such a big impact on the planet?
But it's a great reminder that even the smallest organisms can play a crucial role in our planet's health. And it underscores the importance of continuing to learn and adapt, as we face the challenges of climate change.
It's a lot to digest, but I'm feeling inspired to learn more and to find ways to make a difference.
Me too. And remember, every action we take, no matter how small, can contribute to a healthier planet.
Well said. Now, let's shift gears and explore another aspect of this issue that might surprise our listeners. We've talked about the downsides of phytoplankton, but could there be any potential benefits to these tiny algae, even in the context of climate change?
That's a great question to consider. While this study focused primarily on the negative effects, there's a whole other side to phytoplankton that's worth exploring. And that has to do with their incredible ability to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So even though phytoplankton can, contribute to warming in some cases, they also have this incredible ability to absorb CO2, which is like exactly what we need to fight climate change.
Right.
It seems like we're back to that initial question, are they heroes or villains?
Yeah, it's not that black and white.
Right.
It's more like they're playing both sides of the game, and the outcome, really depends on a lot of factors.
Okay.
But this carbon capturing ability, that's definitely something worth exploring further.
Yeah, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this potential superpower.
Well, just like plants on land, phytoplankton use photosynthesis to, convert sunlight and CO2 into energy and organic matter.
Right, right.
This process pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locks it up in their bodies.
Okay, that makes sense. But we already learned that a lot of that carbon gets released back into the atmosphere when they decompose.
Right.
So how is this a solution?
Here's where it gets interesting. A small portion of that phytoplankton biomass sinks to the bottom of the lake when it dies.
Oh, okay.
And if the conditions are right, like in, very deep lakes or those with low oxygen at the bottom, that carbon can get buried in the sediment.
So instead of being released back into the atmosphere, it just gets trapped at the bottom of the lake?
Exactly. It's like I guess you could say like a natural carbon storage vault.
Okay.
And over very long periods, this buried carbon can actually turn into, fossil fuels,
Wow.
effectively removing it from the carbon cycle for millions of years.
Yeah. That's amazing. So these tiny algae could potentially help us fight climate change in the long run by locking away carbon.
It's a possibility. And researchers are, starting to investigate how we might enhance this process.
Right.
For example, some scientists are exploring ways to artificially stimulate phytoplankton growth in certain areas, essentially creating carbon sinks in the ocean.
Oh, that's fascinating. It sounds like we're talking about geoengineering, but using natural processes.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a hybrid approach, and
Yeah.
it comes with its own set of, risks and uncertainties, just like any other form of geoengineering.
Right.
But the potential is certainly there.
So it seems like phytoplankton are a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
They can contribute to climate change, but they also have this untapped potential to help us mitigate it.
Right.
It's a lot to consider.
It is, and it highlights, how crucial it is to approach climate change solutions with a nuanced perspective.
Oh.
There are no easy answers, and every action we take has potential trade-offs.
So what's the bottom line for our listeners?
Yeah.
What do you want them to take away from this this complex conversation about phytoplankton and climate change?
I think the key message here is that we need to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring solutions.
Yeah.
The more we understand about these complex systems, the better equipped we'll be to, make informed decisions about how to protect our planet.
That's a great point, and it reminds us that each of us has a role to play,
For sure.
whether it's, reducing our own carbon footprint, advocating for change, or simply spreading awareness about these issues.
Absolutely. Even small actions can add up to make a big difference. And remember, the future of our planet depends on our collective actions.
Well said. This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. We've explored the complex role of phytoplankton in the climate system, from their potential to worsen warming to their intriguing ability to lock away carbon.
Right.
It's a reminder that nature is full of surprises, and the more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to discover.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep diving deep.